Welcome back to Personal Finances. We're in Chapter 10, and today I want to just address one of the aspects of becoming debt-free, owning a home, and really kind of challenging the underlying assumption that owning a home is the American dream. We have been talking about how the words of wisdom that from Proverbs is the borrower is servant to the lender, that we become a servant, a slave to the lender, and because we don't have the freedom to spend as we may desire. There's a portion of our income that in essence they lay claim to, that they own, that we don't have any control over anymore. And that if we are ever going to be at a point in our life to become debt free, this is an area, owning a home, that we need to address first and foremost. Because for most people, this will be the largest debt that they ever have in their life. We're reminded from week 6, as we talked about principles of money management, that when we look at setting long-term goals, we need to do it with the right priorities, especially focusing on lifestyle. And one of the biggest lifestyle choices that we make is the house that we're going to live in. How we want naturally bigger and better and newer and faster and more glitzy, and homes are no exception. But we are reminded that if we want to have right priorities, that first of all, we do need to take care of our family, but we need to learn how to have that lifestyle that I can be content with. And that's a mindset of how we can enjoy what we have. And so with respect to the American home, I grew up in a generation that owning the home was the American dream. You did everything you could to get into a home, even for very little down, because you were almost always guaranteed that that home was going to increase in value. And that if you could get your foot in the door and you had to turn around and sell that home 3 years later, the home was going to appreciate. It was going to have increased in value enough that it will cover your closing costs, and maybe you'll even make a little bit of money off of it. And that was a great thing. But nowadays, we can't count on that. Nowadays, we see too much fluctuation in the housing market, going up and down, whether it's movement of interest rates, whether it's crash in the housing industry, no matter what it may be. No longer can that be, quote, a guaranteed investment. And one of the things when you talk about houses is you have to avoid, and this is part of the mindset shift that needs to happen, you have to avoid trying to keep up with the Joneses. You can't look at your friends that you graduated from school. You can't look at those you hang around with from work or from church or from other social gatherings and say, I need to have a house that's just like them. No, you don't need to. You may want to. You need a house that will provide for your basic living needs, to provide for your family. And if you can get that shift in your mindset, then that allows you to make decisions that are more head related than just your heart and your emotions. No longer should you be making house decisions to keep up with the Joneses. No longer should you be making those decisions because it's a guaranteed investment. In fact, nowadays, you should always compare what it pays, what it costs to rent versus having a mortgage. And when I talk about having a mortgage, I'm talking about the total cost of owning a house, not just the payment itself, but the lost opportunity cost for what you could have done with the money that was a down payment, for the repairs cost, for property taxes, for all those things that go into owning a home. In the old days, it used to be that mortgage payments were almost always substantially less than rent payments. So it always made sense that if you could get into a home, to get into a home. But that's not the case nowadays. Rents have sometimes come down, and as house prices have increased, mortgage payments have increased also. One of the things that you need to consider when you're choosing decisions between renting and buying is just the flexibility that you have within the house itself. Being able to do what you want when it comes to decorating or other decisions with respect to the kind of appliances you have or all of those kinds of things. Of course, when you own, you have much more flexibility. But also recognize that when you rent, that there are certain risks that you, in essence, have passed on to the landlord. I used to live in Santa Rosa, California. A lot of my friends and I even have some family still there, have lost their houses. And one of my friends there was a renter, and he lost his house, but since he rented, that risk was assumed by the landlord. Now, I know it sounds terrible for that kind of tragedy, but you have to take those things into account when you're renting versus buying. That when you're buying, you are taking that risk upon yourself. And the way you mitigate that risk, of course, we're going to be talking about insurance to mitigate some of that risk. But sometimes insurance, depending upon where you are, can become very, very expensive. I used to live in South Florida, and the only way you could protect yourself against hurricanes was have flood insurance. But the flood insurance that was available was extremely expensive, so that almost nobody had it. And when you own, and if you get wiped out or you get damaged by a hurricane or some other flood like that, you're the one who is at risk on that. There's lots of pros and cons on owning, like you control your property. But one of the things that I would just ask you to consider is step back and say, do I want to own or do I want to rent? And it may be that decision for certain seasons of your life will be different. Thank you.